In this video, we'll be taking a look at 4 NHL games happening on January 23rd, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 8 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 4 NHL games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Vegas Golden Knights versus Toronto Maple Leafs. For the side, this matchup feels less like a spreadsheet and more like a drama on ice. Vegas comes into Toronto as the small road favorite on most boards, sitting in that short money range on the money line, while the Leafs are hovering around even cash or a touch better as home underdogs. You can see why the books shade toward the Knights on paper. They have the stronger overall record, something like 24-13-12 against Toronto's roughly 24-17-9. A solid spine with names like Jack Eichel and Thomas Hertl, and they already walked out of the last meeting with that wild 6-5 overtime win fresh in everyone's memory. Even with that, this spot has sneaky home side written all over it for anyone who has watched this league for a while. Toronto has been wobbling, a 1-3-1 stretch in their last 5, while Vegas has looked steadier, but the Leafs still own a strong home profile at Scotiabank, with something like a 16-6-6 mark that quietly puts them near the top of their division on home ice. That building is going to be loud, a bit salty, and very emotional for Mitch Marner's first game back in the same rink wearing gold instead of blue, and that kind of storyline really does move the mood, even if it does not change a single number on a stat sheet. Marner is now firmly a Golden Knight after that big sign and trade in 2025, so this is not nostalgia, it is a live wire reunion where every touch of the puck will get a reaction. From a style point of view, Vegas brings the more polished defensive profile, allowing something around the mid-20s in shots per game and keeping goals against under the 3 mark, while Toronto lives closer to chaos with shot totals against in the low 30s and goals against closer to 3.3. So on paper, you get the classic grown-up team versus roller coaster team split. But here is the thing, the Knights are on the back half of a back-to-back after a tight loss in Boston, flying in and stepping straight into a marquee night with all eyes on them, and that is a different kind of fatigue than just tired legs. On top of that, they are dealing with missing depth pieces like Colton Sissons and Brett Howden and trying to work in Rasmus Andersson on the blue line after his move and off-ice hurdles, which can lead to small coverage mistakes that do not always show up in the headline numbers. Toronto is also on a back-to-back, but at least they get to go home, reset a bit, and roll into their own rink. They have their own injury story, with William Nylander parked on injured reserve with that groin issue, Brandon Carlo and Oliver Ekman-Larsson carrying day-to-day tags, and Anthony Stolarz plus Dakota Mermis on the shelf, so it is hardly a clean bill of health. Honestly, that kind of lineup crunch usually pushes a team to lean even harder into what it already is. For the Leafs, that means high-event hockey, trading rushes, letting Austin Matthews and John Tavares drive the offense, and trusting Joseph Woll in net with Hill to be ready behind him if things get sideways. If you zoom out a bit, the numbers say Vegas looks more complete and stable, but the situation screams live home dog, with elite finishers, solid enough goaltending, and a crowd that has mixed feelings but big energy toward a former star in a new sweater. It is the sort of night where the team with the slightly worse chart can play above its usual level for 60 minutes simply because everything feels bigger, from the first face-off to the last whistle. We are not talking guarantees here, just probabilities, but with this price range and this context, leaning into the Toronto chaos over the Vegas structure makes sense for the spread. As our first pick for this matchup, the Toronto Maple Leafs money line is our full game side pick. Now shifting to the total, forget the betting board for a second and picture the kind of game this matchup usually turns into. Vegas brings one of the sharper power plays in the league, hovering in the mid-20s by percentage, and they are skating into a rink where the home team scores at almost the same clip as they do. Toronto's offense likes to skate as if every night is a track meet, so the natural rhythm for this pairing is closer to first to 4 wins than a tight, patient chess match. Their last meeting ended 6-5 in overtime, which tells you a lot about how these rosters interact when they actually get on the ice. You put this much top-end talent into one game, give both sides the green light to create, and it is not shocking when the scoreboard operator gets a workout. Head-to-head, the higher scoring outcomes have shown up plenty, with a good chunk of the recent games landing above the key number the market keeps coming back to. For this season, the two teams together are averaging somewhere around the mid-sixes in total goals per night while also allowing totals in that same general neighborhood, so even a normal game for both sides pushes you near the posted number. On the market side, most books have parked this total between 6 and 6.5, sometimes shading alternate overs with extra juice or hanging numbers that almost dare you to pick a side on the hook. That range lines up almost perfectly with what the season-level scoring patterns are already saying, which is always a little funny because it feels obvious, but it matters when you are trying to decide if this particular matchup leans more wild or more tame. Here is where context kicks in again. Both teams are on back-to-backs, which usually means the structure loosens a bit, especially in the second and third periods. Defensive legs get tired a little faster, line changes get a bit sloppy, and coaches sometimes shorten benches in ways that help offense more than defense because they keep rolling their best players. Vegas is missing that hard-working depth in the middle, with guys like Sissons and Howden not available, and still figuring out how Anderson fits into their defensive rotation, so small gaps can open up in their usual shell. Toronto, meanwhile, is missing Nylander's pure play driving but leaning hard on its top guns and a blue line that has shown cracks, which can mean more broken plays, more turnovers, and more rush chances either way. That is the kind of recipe that sets up odd man rushes, messy rebounds, and the occasional blown coverage that ends with a red light flashing and a goalie staring at his defense. You can almost hear a bench coach muttering something unprintable after a missed assignment in a game like this. The emotional layer around Marner's return adds another twist, because these nights often start tight but open up as soon as the first one goes in, especially if the crowd swings hard after a big moment. So when you put together two dangerous offensive groups, a leaky shot against profile on the Toronto side, dangerous special teams that punish mistakes, and a total sitting in a range the averages are already pressing against, the scales tilt toward a higher scoring script rather than a cautious one. It is still a forecast and not a sure thing, and it is always meant for bettors who are staying within their limits, but the story this matchup tells, on paper and in context, points toward plenty of goals rather than a slow grind. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Tampa Bay Lightning versus Chicago Blackhawks. This matchup feels like one of those nights where you can almost hear the story before the puck even hits the ice. You have a rested contender rolling into town, comfortable in its own skin, and a home team trying to ride emotion more than certainty. Tampa comes in sitting at something like a heavyweight record. Think 31 to 13 to 4 territory with that long point streak that just will not quit, the kind of stretch that makes other teams start checking the standings a little more than they admit. Chicago, on the other side, is closer to a break-even profile at around 21 to 22 to 7, which sounds fine on paper, but it carries a very different energy when you are facing a team that has been stacking results for weeks. Layer on the scheduling quirk, Tampa having that extra rest after taking care of business earlier in the week, while Chicago has to play the emotional road game and then flip the switch again back home the very next night. That is the kind of spot bettors circle on the board because fatigue does not show up on the lineup sheet, but it absolutely shows up in puck battles and decision-making. Here is the thing, stylistically these two clubs are not trying to play the same sport most nights. Tampa is built like a group that is perfectly happy to squeeze the air out of a game, limit mistakes, and then punish you the second you blink, almost like a team that has been through enough springs to know how to manage energy and risk. Chicago leans more into the spoiler role, needing spurts of chaos, momentum swings, and those loud crowd bursts to tilt a game that, on paper, is usually tilted against them. If you have ever watched a clear favorite and thought, this feels like a boxing match where one fighter is just waiting for the opening, that is the kind of rhythm Tampa often plays with. The numbers that sit behind the vibes quietly back this up. Tampa has been outscoring opponents by close to a goal per night, not because every game is a track meet, but because they pair a top-tier attack with a defense that rarely gives up freebies. Chicago is working from the other side of the ledger, negative goal differential, shot creation that sits closer to the basement than the penthouse, and a defense that bends more often than a coach would like to admit in a press conference. You can feel the difference if you just imagine which side is more likely to control the puck for long stretches and which side is more likely to be chasing, literally and figuratively. Now, if you are thinking, wait, didn't Chicago already steal one from them earlier? You are right, there was that earlier meeting where Chicago edged out a tight 3-2 result. That serves as a nice reminder that in hockey weird things happen. A hot goalie here, a random bounce there, and suddenly the underdog is walking out happy. But over a full season and over a full profile, Tampa has been the more ruthless, repeatable team, the one that looks more likely to tilt the ice over 60 minutes rather than hoping for the perfect storm. Odds makers are not sentimental about it either. They have Tampa hanging in that strong favorite range, roughly around a 2.5 to 1 price, with the puck line sitting at -1.5, which is the market's way of saying, we do not just think they win, we think they have a very real chance to win by margin. When you blend that with the rest advantage, the structural gap at 5-on-5, and the way Tampa has been smothering opponents into submission during this run, the more common script here is not a coin flip that comes down to a lucky bounce. It is a game where the visitors slowly, steadily pull away as the minutes stack up. As our first pick for this matchup, the Tampa Bay Lightning to win and cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. So, shifting the lens a bit, let us talk about how many red lights we are actually expecting behind the goalies. Totals can feel trickier because you are not cheering for a side. You are basically cheering for the personality of the game itself, whether it turns into a slugfest or a slow burn. The number sitting on this matchup is hovering around that 6.5 total, which, if you are just glancing, makes some sense when you remember Tampa can absolutely fill the net when they want to. They have been living in that 3.5 goals per game neighborhood, which sounds like a team that wants to trade chances, but the funny thing is, they really do not. They have paired that scoring punch with a defense that has been holding opponents close to 2.5 per night, limiting shots, and killing penalties at a level that makes coaches sleep better on road trips. It is that blend of controlled offense and stingy structure that often pulls games toward the middle instead of letting them spiral upward. Chicago lives on the other end of the spectrum offensively. They are not exactly peppering goalies every night, sitting in the bottom group of the league in both shots per game and goals per game. So they tend to rely on quality over quantity, hoping that the few looks they do get are clean. But against a team like Tampa that tracks well and protects the middle of the ice, those clean looks can be in very short supply. If you imagine this game in your head, it feels less like constant end-to-end rushes and more like Chicago needing to make a lot out of a little. We also have a bit of history to lean on, even if it is just a sliver. That earlier meeting between these two teams did not explode. It landed neatly on 5 total goals in a 3-2 finish, which sits comfortably below that 6.5 number on the board. On top of that, the various models and projection tools that people love to check, the stuff you would see plugged into betting dashboards or analytics sites, have been pointing towards something in the mid-5 to low-6 goal range for this type of matchup. In plain language, that means math people are quietly nodding along with the idea that the posted total is a touch richer than the most likely scoring groove. There is also the human side that the spreadsheet cannot fully capture, but it still matters. Tampa has been dealing with some key absences, which has nudged them even more toward a structured, responsible approach, leaning on systems and details instead of turning every game into a free skate. Chicago is coming in on short rest, with travel in the mix, and tired legs do not always translate into more offense. Often it just shows up as slower transitions and fewer crisp passes through the neutral zone. That kind of spot tends to grind games down instead of lighting them up, especially against a team that already prefers structure. So when you put it together, the picture that forms is a game that is more likely to land in that 5 or 6 goal sweet spot than to rocket past 7. You can absolutely imagine something like a 4-2 or 3-2 type of night, the sort of scoreline that feels competitive but never quite tips into full-on chaos for 60 minutes. In that world, the posted number starts to look just a bit high compared to how these two teams actually play, especially with one side clamping down defensively and the other struggling to generate steady offense, particularly on the back end of a back-to-back. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. St. Louis Blues versus Dallas Stars. Under the lights in Dallas, this meeting feels less like a wild Friday night race and more like a stress test for one tired favorite and one beat-up visitor. You can almost picture it, crowd buzzing, but both benches knowing this is more about discipline and patience than flashy highlights. Dallas comes in with the record of a serious contender, piling up far more wins than losses and drawing a solid chunk of games to overtime or a shootout, and they have been especially steady on home ice. St. Louis, on the other hand, shows a very different story, with a losing mark overall and a road record that reads like a team still searching for its identity away from home. They did snag that early season win in the first head-to-head, which is the kind of result that sticks in a locker room, but that was a different moment with a slightly different feel on both rosters. What really jumps out now is how thin the Blues are in key forward spots. With multiple regulars out in the middle and bottom six, you see youngsters and depth players pushed into roles that usually need polished, veteran timing. It is exciting for their future to have names like those recent prospects getting real minutes, but in a loud building against a layered defensive group, that experience gap shows up in the small details, like wall battles and decision-making on breakouts. Dallas, even in a bit of a funk, still looks like the deeper side, both down the middle and on the wings. They have a proven scorer who can tilt a game with one shot, and they roll enough trusted lines that they do not need to lean on one player every shift. Recently, the Stars have been stuck in an annoying little stretch where the goals have not matched the chances, but that kind of skid usually refocuses an experienced group rather than breaks it. They were shut down in that recent road game. They have dropped several of their last handful, yet tucked in there was a statement win where everything clicked and you could see the ceiling again. Special teams and defensive structure also tilt toward the home side. Dallas runs a power play that has been far more dangerous than what St. Louis can throw out there, while the Blues are still trying to solve their scoring issues at even strength. Across the season, the Stars have allowed fewer goals per game and generally looked more comfortable protecting a lead, which matters when the matchup shapes up like a grind. Market numbers reflect that gap, with Dallas priced clearly as the favorite and St. Louis sitting as the road underdog. That is not some mystical sign, it is simply how odds makers and bettors have weighed talent, form, and injuries. All of that context, from roster health to style to home ice, points us in a very specific direction on the side. As our first pick for this matchup, the Dallas Stars on the money line as favorites is our full game side pick. The total number sits in that classic range where odds makers are basically asking, is this going to be a tight, playoff-style chess match or something closer to pond hockey with goalies as decoration? On paper, Dallas still carries the reputation of a team that can hang 3 or 4 goals on almost anyone when they are rolling. St. Louis has offensive talent as well, and they have already shown they can get on the board against this opponent once this season. But that headline version does not really match what we are seeing lately. The Blues have been stuck near the bottom of the league in goals per game, and with several forwards out, their attack leans more on grinding shifts and net front scraps than on clean, creative rushes. If you scroll through their recent box scores, you see a pattern that is hard to ignore. Total goals in their games keep landing in that 4, 5, maybe 6 range, but rarely blowing up into track meet territory. That kind of repetition is usually not an accident. It is a mix of limited firepower and a coaching staff trying to keep games within reach by tightening everything up. Dallas has quietly been playing in a lot of lower scoring results too. Across their last few outings, you see several games where they score 1 or 2, allow a couple, and the final number on the board stays under that 6-goal mark. There was that one big 6-goal outburst in a statement win, but outside of that, the theme has been tighter, more controlled, and a little frustrating for fans who love goals. Goaltending and approach both feed into this picture. Even with a shaky stretch on the calendar, the Stars starter still owns season numbers that say he is far from a liability, and he is fully capable of resetting and giving a solid performance. On the other side, the Blues' current number 1 has been steady enough that his team often hangs around even when they are struggling to score. When you pair that with coaches preaching structure, smarter gaps, and better details instead of letting games turn into chaos, you get fewer odd man rushes and fewer free looks from the slot. There is also the scheduling wrinkle of Dallas playing on the second night of a back-to-back. Teams in that spot frequently choose a more controlled tempo, especially if they manage to get in front. You see shorter shifts, safer exits, and fewer risky pinches from the blue line, all of which slow games down little by little. Put all of these pieces together, from thin depth on the visiting attack to conservative tactics and recent scoring trends, and you get a matchup that feels more like a 3-1 or 3-2 type of night than a full-on offensive showcase. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Philadelphia Flyers versus Colorado Avalanche. Picture Denver on a hockey night, the air thin, the crowd loud, and one bench looking a little heavier in the legs than the other. You have Philadelphia coming in from Salt Lake City, having just gone through the grinder, and Colorado sitting at home, still annoyed about that recent shootout loss that slipped through their fingers. It is that classic spot where one team feels like it just stepped off a cross-country flight, and the other feels like it slept in its own bed and had time for a proper morning skate. Colorado rolls into this matchup on top of the Central with a record of 34-5-9, and that is not some quiet, fluky thing hiding in the numbers. Philly has slid to 23-17-9 after a rough 1-5-2 skid that has pulled back the curtain on every weak seam in its defensive game. Honestly, if you have watched even a bit of that stretch, you can almost feel the frustration building shift by shift as coverage breaks down and rebounds do not get cleared. Ball Arena has turned into the kind of place visiting teams circle on the schedule with a little sigh. The Avalanche have only one regulation home loss all season, that 7-3 blowout against Nashville that felt more like a weird one-off than a blueprint. Even the recent stumble at home took a shootout and a heroic 40-save performance from Anaheim's goalie to drag the result away from them. That is not a sign of a soft favorite. That is more like a reminder that sometimes the other goalie just stands on his head and shrugs at your shot volume. Meanwhile, the Flyers are not exactly gliding into town. They just gave up 5 in an overtime loss to Utah, another night where the defensive structure frayed as the game wore on and the fatigue set in. Now they go from altitude in Salt Lake City to even more altitude in Denver, which is like going from jogging uphill to sprinting with a backpack on. They are carrying a defense that has allowed 36 goals in its last 7 losses, and that kind of number tends to creep into players' heads, even if they try not to admit it. In net, the plan is not what Philly had drawn up at the start of the year. Dan Vladar is on injured reserve with a lower body issue and no clear return date, so the load falls on Samuel Ersson and Alexei Kolosov against a Colorado attack that is basically living around 4 goals per game. It is one thing to rotate those goalies against a middle-of-the-pack offense. It is something very different to throw them into Ball Arena against this group. Colorado's attack is not some theoretical thing on a whiteboard. It is a constant wave, built around Nathan MacKinnon and Martin Necas driving the middle, with Arturi Lekonen and Valery Nichushkin on the wings and Cale Makar jumping in from the blue line. Even when they are not finishing, they are tilting the ice so hard that you can almost feel the game sliding toward the Flyers' crease. And all of those names sit on the active roster for this one, which matters a lot when you are trying to judge whether a favorite truly has its full punch available. They are not perfectly healthy, which is the tiny catch here. Gabriel Landeskog is out for some weeks with an upper body injury, and Devin Tuz is also ruled out until at least late January, so Colorado is not operating at completely full power. Yet the depth behind them still stacks up better than what most opponents can throw over the boards, so the ceiling does not really change. It just means different pieces get bigger minutes. On the other side, Philly is not short on talent at the top of the lineup. Trevor Zegras, Christian Dvorak, Travis Konechny, and Matvei Michkov can absolutely punch back, and they are all firmly in the active group for this game. The problem is that they are being asked to outscore a defense that is leaking chances and a goaltending tandem that has seen Ersson's save percentage slip into the mid-850s during this slide. That is a tough way to live, especially when you are facing a team that rarely lets up if it smells blood. Then there is the market, which is often a good reality check for our bias. Colorado sits around a -300 moneyline favorite with a -1.5 puck line hovering in the -110 ballpark. That price range is basically the odds maker's way of saying, we already expect this to be a multi-goal game if it runs according to form. You do not see that kind of tag on a hollow favorite, you see it on a group the books respect, even when public money likely leans their way. Add up the Flyers' awful travel spot, the emotional edge of a powerhouse still irritated by back-to-back home losses, one a blowout and one stolen by a hot goalie, and the fact that Colorado has not shown sustained weakness at home at 5-on-5, and the picture gets clearer. Altitude favors the deeper bench, the heavier forecheck, and the team that can roll 4 lines without a big drop-off, and all of those boxes tilt toward the home side here. So, if you are asking who is more likely to stretch this into a puck line result instead of a nail-biter, the case points pretty strongly in one direction. As our first pick for this matchup, the Colorado Avalanche to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total number is sitting at 6.5, and when you look at how these two teams are playing right now, that total feels less like a daring line and more like a reasonable middle ground. You are not begging for chaos with that number, you are just asking both teams to be who they have already been. Colorado is putting up about 3.96 goals per game with close to 35 shots a night, while only allowing around 2.27. Philly sits near 2.9 goals for and 3.1 against, and the road version is even messier, about 2.87 scored and 3.17 allowed per game away from home. If you take the average version of both clubs and mash them together, you are already drifting toward a script that lands around 7 total goals. That is before you even sprinkle in context like fatigue and recent form. The Flyers' defense and penalty kill have sagged badly during this slump, giving up those 36 goals across 7 losses. And now they are staring at the second leg of an altitude back-to-back without their preferred starter. Their best goalie is on injured reserve, and there is no clean, calming answer waiting behind him, which tends to create a kind of nervous, reactive style in front. Skaters sometimes try to do too much to help, and that often leads to extra chances the other way instead. On Colorado's side, the crease is in better shape on paper, but it is not bulletproof. Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood are both healthy and on the active roster, yet Blackwood already wore that big loss against Nashville at home. Even in that tight 2-1 shootout result against Anaheim, the Avalanche allowed enough quality that Lucas Dostal had to pile up 40 saves to keep them out. So while the Avs' attack looks scary, their own defensive game has a little wobble, just enough to give Philly room on the scoreboard if the tempo picks up. That is where game flow starts to matter. If the Flyers find themselves chasing, which is very plausible given the setting, they will have to stretch shifts, push their forwards higher, and lean into the skill of guys like Zegras and Konechny to manufacture offense. When that happens, structure usually takes a back seat to creativity, and games start to feel more like wide-open shinny than tight playoff hockey. Neutral zone gaps get bigger, odd man rushes show up more often, and everyone watching feels like one rush in 3 has a real chance to end with a celebration. Special teams can nudge things along too. Colorado's power play sits around the mid-teens in league ranking, facing a Flyers penalty kill stuck in the high 70s and trending the wrong direction. That kind of matchup is exactly how a 3-2 game quietly becomes 4-2, and how an empty net situation very naturally flips it to 5-2 by the final horn. So the most reasonable script here is not some sleepy 2-1 grind. It looks more like an Avalanche team coming in irritated from that Ducks result, pushing the pace early, and a tired Flyers group eventually needing to trade chances to stay in touch. That sort of environment, especially at altitude, often turns into a race where both offenses get chances to pad the box score, even if one side is clearly stronger overall. Nothing about a total is ever guaranteed. Of course, a locked-in goalie can blow up any ticket in a single night, but when you stack current scoring rates, recent defensive form, travel spot, and the special teams matchup, the most natural lane for this game is toward goals rather than a low-event chess match. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.